welcome to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator at the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today we are joined by J School alum Alison Young, independent journalist, and she's a Hurley Chair in Public Affairs Reporting and Director of the Missouri School of Journalism Washington program, and she's also the author of Pandora's Gamble. I know, Alison, welcome. I know this book has been around for almost a year. What's been your thoughts so far, looking back at this whole project a year later?
Oh, I mean, the opportunity to write my first book after being in journalism for a long time, it was a passion project. It's a topic that I've been reporting on for 15 years. Pandora's Gamble is about the history of very dangerous laboratory accidents that have occurred all across the United States and around the world, going back many, many decades, long before any questions got raised about where COVID-19 came from. But the book has been an exhausting and exhilarating project.
And I know, just so you know, I did read the book last week. So you talk about 15 years. I know you have like 15 years experience as an investigative reporter. I know you've worked in Atlanta, Detroit, Dallas, Knight Ridder's, Washington Bureau. So just to clarify, so a lot of these stories you had done previously, but you revisited them and kind of updated the context a little bit?
So the book is both, it gives some of the history that I have reported on myself over the years, but actually the book breaks a ton of brand new news. So for this book, I filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests at the federal level and at the state and the local level. The book for the first time reveals a wide range of new and very serious lab accidents, some of which have actually prompted congressional and state legislative attention. So it both is reflecting on the reporting I've done on lab accidents for all of these many years, but also as breaking news.
And I think I saw a TV interview. I mean, the turnaround time to produce this book, I mean, I think I read, 10 months? I mean, it was pretty quick.
It was. I mean, I'm used to doing long form projects. I've been doing investigative and project reporting for USA Today and other news organizations for a long time, but I've never tried to do something as comprehensive as this. And normally, when you're writing a book, or so I'm told, because I have not had this experience, you have a lot longer lead time. But in this case, this was a timely book. When this book was started, we were still, very, very early on in getting vaccines, and the question of where did COVID-19 come from, and the questions about could it have come from a lab accident were being dismissed as a conspiracy theory. And to be sure, there are conspiracy theories out there about where COVID-19 came from, but my book is about why the potential for a lab accident to have contributed to this should have never been dismissed without a thorough independent investigation, something that has never occurred. And so doing this book and turning it around so that it could help inform the public and contribute to the public policy debate as quickly as possible was really important. But it was a grueling process, and I have never worked so many hours, and every single day, and getting up at 4:30 in the morning and weekends, and it was quite the project.
And I know there's quite a few phrases that really jumped out at me. I think one was like, you trust labs to notify the public. They didn't want safety getting in the way of their science, or some common themes about how they didn't want to share. Was it really an eye-opener? Because I think early on you talked about how when you started investigating lab accidents, you just assumed they were well-regulated, documented, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And I think that as people either read this book or start doing some research, even into some of my older coverage for USA Today and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, it's shocking. I mean, I came into this when I was the CDC beat reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and made assumptions that these labs are run under the strictest regulation, and basically that's not the case. It's a patchwork quilt at best of oversight that occurs. And in most cases, labs are largely self-policing when it comes to their safety.
I think the chapter that really jumped out was, I think, chapter 5, lightning strike, where the duct tape on the door. And I think Congress responded to that report, right? They couldn't believe
Yes,
it'd been
they
invested
did.
and we got duct tape on a door.
Yes, this was the CDC based in Atlanta, where I was a local reporter at the time. They had opened a $214 million laboratory facility. At the time, it was supposed to be the most cutting edge facility of its type in the entire world. But they had had a variety of problems with the airflow in the facility. And you want to have negative airflow within these labs to keep basically the pathogens inside and not floating out and around the buildings. But they had so many problems with this particular facility that they had a door to a biosafety level 3 lab that was sealed with duct tape. And I had sources that told me all about that. And they took me to the door one day. And it, as I talk about in the book, I came to learn that it was really emblematic of how safety is dealt with when it comes to high containment labs.
Another mention in the book, I love that KU reference, Cora Downs. I knew the name, but I wasn't really familiar with her story. But I think I looked it up, and I think 100 years ago, she was the first woman to earn a doctoral degree from KU, and then she was recruited as a civilian expert on chemical warfare service at Camp Dietrich in Maryland. That was like one of the first, I think, lab accidents she kind of focused on in the book. So what was it like to have that KU connection in this book?
I loved having the KU connection. So the book really goes back and does a lot of archival research into the birthplace of modern biological safety, which was at Camp Dietrich, Fort Dietrich, just outside of Washington, D.C. And what I ended up uncovering this trove of records in an archive that detailed all of the people who had worked in these labs who had been sickened by their experiments before they developed some of the safety procedures. And what really caught my attention is that many of these scientists and other workers in the labs who were sickened during the World War II, immediately post-World War II era, many of them were women, which for me was really interesting, because these were women's stories that had not been told before, and they're being told for the first time in Pandora's Gamble. And as I'm researching all of that, I come across Cora Downs, and she was, she was a world-leading expert, and I was thrilled to find her, but also embarrassed that I didn't know her story when I was at KU. And the wonderful archivists at the University of Kansas were very helpful in providing the files that they had on her for help with my research.
Another thing I love about the book, obviously, amazing attention to detail, very thorough. I think I counted 70 pages of notes. And you're very meticulous, obviously, like breaking it down by the chapters. And I know I really appreciated that, because I referred to it a lot, like, where did this come from? So that was great. So your inspiration for investigative reporting, did that stem from your time at KU, or did you come to KU realizing I want to pursue investigative reporting?
I came to KU knowing I wanted to do investigative reporting. My inspiration for it really was my mom. My mother, when I was young, my parents got divorced, and my mom had to return to the workplace and encountered all kinds of issues over the course of my growing up. Whether it was consumer ripoffs or problems in the job place or whatever it was. And I saw journalism as something where journalists can give voice and tell the stories of consumer issues that are wronging people who can't afford to deal with a problematic product. So it really was an inspiration of sort of watching the kinds of things that I felt journalism, could make a difference for other people.
And I guess you probably just answered my next question, but was there one journalism story that really caught your attention growing up, or was that it, kind of those personal experiences?
I think it was personal experiences, and it was also the awareness of, the amazing work that was done during the Watergate era,
Mhm.
the idea that journalism can speak truth to power, and can shine a light, even at the highest levels of our government. And I think that that's something that always has stuck with me. And um, it is an important trust that is placed in those of us who are fortunate enough to be journalists, that we are out there to ask questions on behalf of the public, and to get answers for them, and to shine a light and do things that may not be easy for an average member of the public to do.
And I know you work with students there at the University of Missouri with the public affairs reporting program. Is there still a passion from students for investigative reporting? Do you still see it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think for the same reasons that those of us who, when we were working at the University Daily Kansan and we were interested in doing watchdog and investigative reporting, that passion is still there with students today. And I've seen that when I've come back and spoken at the University of Kansas. I'm thrilled that there are students who really want to go out and do that kind of watchdog reporting, because we need it now more than ever.
You talk about watchdog reporting, holding people accountable. What about the challenge of like building sources? That was another thing I loved about the book, where you went to great extremes. I mean, you tracked down like family members of like, the lab scientists that were involved like in the 1950s. Obviously, they weren't still around, but you tracked down their children. I mean, obviously, that took probably some doing to get that trust built up among them, I would guess.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I think one of the things that you have to do, especially dealing with people who are not accustomed to being in the news media, is let them know that you're serious. And that means sharing with them a bit what you're finding and why you're doing it. And I also was fortunate enough that I had a couple of University of Missouri students who were working with me as researchers on various aspects of the project. And so I had one of them, Skylar Laird, who was also assisting me in going through and finding obituaries for some of, especially the women who had died after their time at Camp Dietrich. And so, I mean, it was really an amazing project to go pull those archival records. And I also loved sharing my passion for old archival and often still paper records, because when I was at the University of Kansas, my group of student journalists on the Kansan were among the first to get one of the first personal computers in the newsroom. Bill Skeet, who was one of my colleagues, I remember him introducing me one day to an Apple computer that he'd gotten in this very sort of cutting edge thing that I couldn't figure out at the time, called a mouse. And so, the technology changes that have occurred since I was at KU have really gone to online records and things that are available readily from your desktop. But I think it's still important for journalists to recognize that that is a relatively recent development, and there is still a ton of information that is not digitized, and we need to be looking for that as well. And so I was glad to have an opportunity to share that with some of the younger journalists who were assisting me as researchers.
So at KU, you probably Watson Library, a lot of microfilm. You have to do the old microfilm crank.
Oh yeah, and nothing like getting dizzy while you're doing microfilm and microfiche. I mean, oh my gosh.
I remember those days. So obviously you talk about the lab leaks, but you also have experience, like with health, environmental, and consumer issues. Is there one that you prefer over the other, or are they all kind of the same in terms of like the story you're trying to get out of that?
I love all of those issues. Those have been the topics I've gravitated to throughout my career, and I think actually all of them kind of feed on each other. One might say that Pandora's Gamble is a science book, but it's science, it's environment. I mean, there are lab accidents that occur in the book that actually involve spewing unsterilized wastewater, into a storm drain next to a city. So, I mean, that's an environmental contamination. But I view everything through the lens, I think, mostly as a consumer reporter. The idea of how does this affect real people, and consumer can be both a consumer of goods, but it's also a consumer of, we are consumers of the services our government provides to us. And so what kinds of services are those who are supposed to be overseeing these labs doing. That's part of it as well. But I've done everything. I mean, I've done a lot about labs of late, but I mean, everything from bad food and nursing homes and dietary supplements and terrible medical practices. Anytime there's an opportunity to shine a light that's going to hopefully make a difference and hopefully make things a bit safer, those are the kinds of stories I really gravitate toward.
And I know this day and age in journalism, I mean, it's all about, it seems like, the more content, you got to produce content. Investigative journalism, I mean, that takes time, that takes resources. I mean, do you feel, confident saying that, hey, I'm in a position where I can still get time to do those kind of stories? Because I know that's not always the case, especially at a lot of smaller publications.
Yeah, it is one of, I think, the real challenges is the whole sort of 24/7 news cycle, all of the platforms that we are having to feed as journalists makes it very difficult. But I would say that one of the ways that I think it still can be done, there obviously are journalists who are fortunate enough, as I have been, to be on a dedicated investigative team, and that's what you're doing. But most of my career, I did not hold the title of investigative reporter, and I still did substantial investigative reporting while basically feeding the beast and covering beats. And I think that one of the great ways to tell investigative stories is in rolling investigations, where you are breaking pieces of a larger investigation over time, and you just keep at it. And in some ways, that might actually be a more effective way of communicating information than the big, huge land with a thud project.
And do you still get a rush when you see your byline? I mean, I guess now you have a book, so your name's on a book, but do you still get a rush seeing your byline in a national, regional publication?
I absolutely get excited about seeing the stories that I produce. I don't know so much whether it's the byline. It's that I feel grateful to have the opportunity to hopefully make a difference through my journalism. And it is, it is something that is a wonderful thing to have the opportunity to have a platform to share important information. And that's not something that I take for granted. And so, yes, I mean, whether I am writing something for The Guardian or for USA Today, or doing something like the book, having an opportunity to share information that is important for people to know, that empowers them to make decisions, is something I will forever get excited about.
And I would think you'd have to get satisfaction too, like when Congress, responds to some of the work that you've done. I mean, you kind of prompted that reaction.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that, you never know what the public or policymakers are going to do with the information that you put out there. But I think that the hope is that as journalists, through sharing information and shining a light, we can hopefully leave this world a little bit better than it was before we did our work.
And you covered the CDC for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Did you apply for that position, or did you get recruited for that? Because that sounds like kind of the dream partnership.
Yeah, it was. I applied for that job. At the time, I had been on the national investigative team for the Knight Ridder chain of newspapers, and was based in Washington, D.C. But I had never covered a federal agency, in that kind of a beat. And when that job came open, I thought it would be an amazing opportunity. And in many ways, it is to this day one of the favorite. I mean, it may be my favorite job that I've had in journalism. The CDC is such a unique organization. It is unique in that it's a federal agency not based in Washington, D.C. Right. Their headquarters is in Atlanta. And it was an opportunity to do all kinds of stories, everything from explanatory stories to outbreaks and the disease detectives and the work that they're doing, as well as covering the agency at a pretty pivotal time in its history, where the agency was having a massive exodus of some of their top scientists and top leadership. And I was able to do some defining coverage that brought attention to the concerns that were raised at that time, the CDC and the brain drain and some of the reorganization of the agency might put it at risk, they were warning way back then, of failing should a really catastrophic event occur. And the CDC has had its stumbles since the pandemic began, and so it's getting a chance to really take a look inside that agency and gain a number of sources there who it's just an amazing group of people there. That is an agency made up of people who are true believers in the same way that journalists often are. I mean, they got into the business to go save the world and stop diseases and do all of those kinds of things, but they also operate, within a government structure that is full of bureaucracies and policies and politics. And so it's a fascinating organization to cover.
Yeah, that was another fascinating thing about the book too, just how those organizations like communicate with each other or lack of communication. I mean, we saw a lot during COVID-19, I thought anyway, like you never knew who was in charge or who was running and who was sharing what information. And that was very enlightening. I love in acknowledgments too, how you mentioned, I think the CDC and then other organizations too, like for the tips they provided, the documentation, that they might've been putting their career on the line, but they were willing to, again, trust you and share that information.
It's very true. And I mean, journalists can't do important work without the help of many people, and having sources who are willing to share information that they think is important to get out to the public. It's critical to the work that we do.
So going back to your time at KU, you're from Omaha, correct?
I am.
How did you get to KU? I think I know this after seeing the acknowledgments. I don't think I quite knew the John Hudnall connection, but was he your high school advisor?
John Hudnall was my high school journalism advisor at Westside High School, and he was an amazing journalism advisor. And when I was getting ready to graduate, he said, are you looking at KU? And I wasn't thinking about going out of state because I didn't know whether financially I could make it work. And he said, I want you to give a call to Dana Livengood, who was the associate dean at the time. And the J School managed to scrape together some money that made it possible for me to come to KU. And one of the things that's wonderful is that John Hudnall, ultimately, when I was the editor of the University Daily Kansan, he applied to come to KU, and I ended up being on that search committee.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
He ultimately came to KU and was there for quite a while and ran the Kansas Scholastic Press Association.
Yeah, I know John. I covered high school sports when his boys were at Lawrence High, so I remember John. And
oh, that's great.
Very well. So you talked about being the editor. You were the editor spring of 1988, right?
I was.
Okay. Well, I'm class of 90, so a lot of students from my year remember that 98 semester very well. Of course, with a national basketball title. And you shared a great photo, I think, of Kevin and Joel's when you came back a few years ago with the champs headline. So what was that experience like covering, just being an editor for a semester and then being a part of like the 1988 national championship?
Oh, I mean, being the editor of the Kansan was a transformative experience. One of the things that, when you get a chance to lead your university newspaper, news organization, you get a chance to experience something that you may not ever experience the opportunity to lead a news organization at any other time in your career. And it was an all-encompassing job. I have made lifelong friends, like Joel and Kevin, who are in that picture. And I mean, we worked hard. We were there all night. We lived in the newsroom. It was an amazing experience. And then that semester was the semester that, there was this amazing run of the KU basketball team, ultimately winning the national championship. And I still will remember putting out that edition of the newspaper where, we had been watching the game and it was looking really good. And, we're heading back to the newsroom because we weren't watching in the newsroom and we're needing to get up to campus. And campus just, I mean, erupted in celebration. And we're putting out that edition. And originally, the original headline, which I don't remember exactly what the words were, but it was this long sentence-like headline. And I remember us standing around and taking a look at the page and just saying, let's just do something really simple, like champs. And it became an iconic headline. So it was an amazing experience.
And also in the acknowledgments of your book, you gave a shout out to Paul Jess and Tom Eblin. I mean, those are two well-known names. What was it like working with them?
Oh, both of them were amazing. I mean, the professors at KU, I mean, there are so many professors who in so many different ways touched my life and you know, helped shape my career. But in particular, both Paul Jess and Tom Eblin, I owe a lot to. Paul Jess was basically my first point of contact at the J School. He was my official advisor. And was the person who shepherded me through the J School. And then when Tom Eblin was hired from the Kansas City Star to be the general manager of the Kansan, I mean, Tom was a huge influence on my career. He, especially, I mean, when I was the editor of the Kansan, you know, you're the student who is running this, but you really, if you're smart, you're going to tap into the experience of the general manager on making decisions and making sure that you're doing things right. And Tom was this very steady, wonderful rock who let me make decisions, but helped me understand, you know, how to go about doing it. And we were very close. I mean, you know, well after, you know, I graduated until he unfortunately passed.
Because he was probably the UDK GM probably about first or second year by the time you became editor, right? I mean, he's probably
it was yeah, mine was the first class.
Was that the first class? Okay, I knew
yeah.
that'd be close. And again, going back to the book, you gave a shout out to your husband, Jeff Taylor. Now he's a J School alum too, but you didn't know each other through KU, right? That was later.
We met in Detroit at the Detroit Free Press. But yeah, and we're a couple years apart, but both Jayhawks, and let's just say that, you know, in our house, he you know, does not like Missouri paraphernalia around the house, and you know, it is one of those sort of odd things to be a Jayhawk in Tiger Country.
So what was it like to have your own kind of close by, built-in editor, proofreader to help you with the book process?
You know, Jeff was a wonderful sounding board. But I will tell you that spouses, when it comes to books, are saints. I mean, it's kind of a miracle that relationships survive in books, because you really, the spouse is someone who ends up picking up everything else around you when you're working on a book, because you're so focused on it. And so, I mean, Jeff was an enormous support during that. And he also did some reads as the drafts started producing. And so it was great hearing his feedback as well.
So did he read the book, or did he figure, hey, I've already seen enough of it as it was during the process?
he a little bit of both. And you know, with great sort of humor and support. I mean, he has listened to a lot about lab accidents for the last couple of years.
Well, thanks, Alison. Hey, I want to close with Fast Five.
Okay.
We've done it for about the last month, so some quick questions. So if you know the exact number, I'm going to be impressed. If you want to ballpark it, that's fine. But how many FOIA requests have you filed in your career?
Oh my. Oh, I mean, I have no idea. A lot. Okay. And you know, and I don't get many of them back quickly, that's for sure. But I stick with them forever.
Okay, we try to keep this a PG podcast. When you receive a heavily redacted document from one of those FOIA requests, how do you respond?
Usually there's a little bit of an eruption, and it's probably not fit for this podcast, but
okay. In the acknowledgments, you referenced two of your aunts who kind of helped nurture that love for writing, and I think they helped publish your first book, did the cardboard covers. Do you recall what was the title of that first book, or the topic?
I don't remember remember what the title. It was more of a picture book. It has a bird on the cover of it. And I remember the bird. I don't know whether it was a nature book or what it was, but it had this wonderful little bird that I had drawn.
So you're an illustrator too. I did not know that.
I know. Who knew? Believe me, nobody really wants me to be an illustrator.
What was the one journalism class at KU you would not dare miss? Your favorite, like your favorite KU journalism class?
Oh, I mean, advanced reporting. I mean, by far.
And who taught that for you?
That was Tom Evelyn.
Tom Evelyn taught that. Okay. So you talked about the Champs paper. So exactly how big was the point size of the Champs headline? Do you remember how big that was?
I do not remember. It was huge, though.
It was huge. I think we have a copy down in our office, and it was over 200 points. So
okay, excellent. I do remember it, and we kept saying, "Can we make it bigger? Can we make it bigger?"
Well, Alison, hey, I appreciate your time. Again, it's been fascinating to watch all your success as an investigative reporter, and congrats on the book. It's hard to believe it's been out for a year. I remember when it first came out, I go, I've got to get Alison on a podcast. So,
awesome.
Hey, best wishes, and thanks for everything, Alison.
Yeah. Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Alison.
Bye.